In the autumn of 1929, America was drunk on its own success, at the quiet satisfaction of hard work paying off. This was something different, something dangerous. Collective intoxication that had gripped everyone from Wall Street bankers to Kansas farmers. From factory workers to school teachers, the country had convinced itself it had cracked the code, figured out the secret formula for permanent wealth. And the stock market was the proof. If you had walked through any American city that October, you would have felt it in the air. Confidence so thick you could almost taste it. Families buying homes they couldn't afford. Young couples picking out furniture on credit. Retired workers betting their pensions on stocks they barely understood. Everyone was getting rich. Everyone assumed they deserved to be. The numbers told a story that seemed almost miraculous. Since 1921, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had climbed sixfold, from 63 to 381 amperes. Factory worker who put $1,000 into the market at the start of the decade was now sitting on $6,000. Stocks that traded for $20 in January could fetch $80 by December. This wasn't investing. This was alchemy. Turning ordinary savings into extraordinary fortunes, the 1920s had delivered wonders that previous generations could never have imagined. Automobiles rolled off Henry Ford's assembly lines so efficiently that a middle-class family could actually own one. Electric lights pushed back the darkness in cities across the nation. Radios brought music and news into living rooms. Refrigerators kept food cold without blocks of ice. And credit, that magical invention, meant you didn't have to wait. You could have it all now and pay later. America wasn't just prosperous, it was transformed. But here's what nobody wanted to see. The same force that was lifting everyone higher was also building something unstable beneath their feet. A foundation made not of concrete, but of confidence. Not of earnings, but of expectations. The stock market had become a national religion. And doubt was heresy. Barbers debated stock picks between customers. Shoeshine boys offered tips on which shares to buy. Housewives formed investment clubs, pooling their grocery money to chase the next big winner. Financial magazines ran headlines like everybody ought to be rich, and people believed it. Why wouldn't they? The evidence was everywhere. Neighbors getting wealthy, friends quitting their jobs to trade full-time, strangers in the street bragging about their portfolios. The market rewarded faith. It punished hesitation. And it seemed to promise that the good times would never end. What America did and understand, what it refused to understand, was that it was standing on solid ground. It was standing on a trapdoor, and the lever was about to be pulled. The miracle of the 1920s stock market had a secret. The outcome owed nothing to superior intelligence, rigorous work, or random luck. It was leverage. Most Americans who poured into the market didn't buy stocks the way you might think. They didn't save up money, walk into a brokerage, and purchase shares outright. They borrowed. Wall Street had invented something called buying on margin, and it changed everything. Here's how it worked. Say you wanted to buy $1,000 worth of stock. You didn't need $1,000. You needed $100. Sometimes less. The broker would lend you the remaining $900, using the stock itself as collateral. If that stock climbed to $1,200, you sold it, paid back the $900 loan, and kept $300 in profit. That's a 200% return on your original $100. Remarkable, isn't it? The math was intoxicating. Put down a little, borrow a lot, and multiply your gains beyond anything a savings account could ever deliver. By 1929, margin buying had infected the entire system. Over $8.5 billion in broker loans were outstanding. To put that in perspective, it was more than all the currency circulating in the United States at the time. The whole country was betting with borrowed money. Out of roughly 1.5 million brokerage accounts, 600,000 were margin accounts. 4 out of every 10 investors were gambling with cash they didn't actually have. And nobody talked about what would happen if stocks went down. Because stocks didn't go down. Not really, not for long. Every dip was a buying opportunity. Every pullback was a chance to get in cheaper before the next climb. That was the gospel. And the congregation was massive. Psychology fed on itself. When your neighbor brags about doubling his money in 3 months, you feel foolish for keeping yours in a savings account earning 3%. When your barber tells you about a hot tip that paid off, you want in on the next one? Success stories spread like wildfire. Cautionary tales were ignored. Everyone knew someone who had struck it rich. clerk who quit his job to trade full-time, a widow who turned her husband's life insurance into a small fortune, a college dropout who was now driving a Cadillac. The market didn't just reward greed, it punished prudence. If you stayed on the sidelines, you watched everyone else get wealthy while you stood still. The fear of missing out was stronger than the fear of losing everything. And that's exactly how bubbles work. They don't need everyone to be foolish. They just need enough people to believe that this time the old rules don't apply, that the music will keep playing, that there will always be a chair when it stops. What the true believers didn't understand was simple. Margin works both ways. If your $1,000 stock rises to $1,200, you make $300 on a $100 investment. But if it falls to $800, you still owe the broker $900. Your $100 is wiped out completely. Now you owe another $100 you don't have. When that happens, the broker doesn't wait. He issues a margin call demanding you deposit more cash immediately. If you can't pay, he sells your stock at whatever price he can get. No negotiation, no mercy. And when thousands of margin calls hit at once, when everyone is forced to sell at the same time, prices don't just fall, they collapse. But in the summer of 1929, that possibility seemed absurd. The market had been climbing for 8 straight years. The economy was booming. The future was limitless. Why would anyone worry about a collapse that had never happened? The answer, of course, is that it had happened before. Many times, but memory is short when money is easy. The market was about to deliver a reminder that would scar a generation. Not everyone was drunk on the dream. Few voices, scattered, ignored, sometimes mocked, had been sounding alarms for months. They saw what the true believers refused to see: cracks in the foundation, rot beneath the shine. But in a nation hypnotized by rising stock prices, warning of danger was almost a crime. The numbers told a troubling story for anyone willing to look. Corporate profits were growing, yes, but not nearly fast enough to justify stock prices that had tripled in 5 years. The gap between what companies actually earned and what their shares cost had stretched into absurdity. Meanwhile, the real economy was already stumbling. Car sales were declining. Housing construction was slowing. Steel production, the backbone of American industry, was falling. Farm prices had been collapsing since the early 1920s, crushing rural communities that politicians preferred to ignore. The Federal Reserve saw the danger. In August 1929, they raised the discount rate from 5% to 6%, trying to cool the speculation by making borrowed money more expensive. It was too little too late. The beast had grown too large to tame with a gentle nudge. Higher interest rates didn't stop the gambling. It just made the gamblers more vulnerable, more exposed, more fragile. And then came Roger Babson. On September 5th, 1929, Babson stood before the National Business Conference and delivered a prophecy that would haunt Wall Street for generations. He was a statistician, forecaster, a man who had been warning about the market for 2 years and had been wrong for 2 years. The bulls called him a fool, broken clock, the prophet of loss. But on that September afternoon, Babson looked at the crowd and spoke words that would prove devastatingly accurate. More people are borrowing and speculating today than ever in our history. Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific. Wise are those investors who now get out of debt and reef their sails. By my afternoon, word of his speech reached Wall Street. The market dropped 3% in hours. Headlines called it the Babson break. And how did Wall Street respond to this warning? They attacked the messenger. The Chicago Tribune published rebuttals from economists and banking titans. Babson's patriotism was questioned. His methods were ridiculed. How dare he threaten the prosperity that America had earned? Irving Fisher, the most celebrated economist in America, stepped forward to calm the nation's nerves. His credentials were impeccable. Yale professor, best-selling author, advisor to presidents. Fisher looked at the same market Babson feared and saw something completely different. Stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau, he declared. I do not feel there will be soon, if ever, a 50 or 60-point break below present levels. A permanently high plateau. Those words would become the most infamous prediction in financial history. Within weeks, the market would not drop 50 points. It would drop 200 and keep falling for 3 years. But in September 1929, Fisher was the voice of authority. Babson was the voice of doom. America chose to believe the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. The market recovered from the Babson break. Prices stabilized. Investors exhaled. See? Nothing to worry about. The pessimists were wrong again. But not everyone was relaxing. In offices scattered across Manhattan, one man was making very different moves. Quiet moves. Calculated moves. Moves designed to profit from the catastrophe that others refused to see coming. His name was Jesse Livermore. Livermore was a legend, a trader who had made and lost fortunes multiple times over. He had shorted the market before the panic of 1907 and walked away a millionaire. He understood something that most investors never grasp, that markets can go down just as violently as they go up. Through the summer and fall of 1929, Livermore was secretly building a massive short position, betting that stocks would crash. He used over 100 different brokers to hide what he was doing, masking the size of his bet. By October, he was down $6 million on paper. His position looked foolish. The market kept climbing. The bulls kept winning, but Livermore held firm. He had seen this before. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. Just had to wait. September passed. The Babson break faded from memory. October arrived with golden autumn light and the quiet confidence of a nation that believed it had conquered the business cycle forever. On Sunday, October 20th, families went to church, read the financial pages over breakfast, and planned their week around the assumption that prosperity was permanent. They had no idea that in 4 days, their world would begin to collapse, and in 8 days, it would be unrecognizable. Thursday, October 24th, 1929. The morning air over Manhattan carried a strange tension. Veterans of the trading floor would later say they felt it before the opening bell, an electricity in the atmosphere, the kind that precedes a violent storm. Most people ignored it. Nerves, they told themselves. Monday jitters bleeding into the week. But the market knew something the people didn't. When the bell rang at 10 a.m., prices didn't surge upward like they had for months. They hesitated, wavered, and then as if a switch had been flipped, they began to fall. Not slowly, gently, they plunged. In the first 3 minutes of trading, nearly 3 million shares changed hands. $2 million in wealth vanished before anyone could understand what was happening. The selling came from everywhere. Small investors, large institutions, trusts, banks. Everyone seemed to be racing for the exit at once. And then the real nightmare began. The ticker tape, that thin ribbon of paper that transmitted stock prices to brokerage offices across America, fell behind almost immediately. It couldn't keep up with the volume of trades. Within an hour, the tape was running 30 minutes late. Then an hour, then 2. Investors stared at prices that no longer existed. They watched numbers scroll past that were ancient history. A stock might show $85 on the tape while trading at $65 on the floor. Nobody knew what anything was actually worth. Imagine trying to navigate a sinking ship when your instruments show you where you were an hour ago. That was Black Thursday. By noon, the selling had become something beyond panic. It was primal, desperate. A stampede of human beings trying to escape a burning building through a single door. The New York Stock Exchange closed its visitors' gallery. The chaos on the floor had become too disturbing for outsiders to witness. Brokers screamed into telephones. Clerks sprinted between trading posts with order slips crumpled in their fists. Grown men, titans of finance who prided themselves on cold calculation, were seen with tears streaming down their faces. 12.9 million shares traded that day, a record that dwarfed anything the exchange had ever seen. The Dow had plummeted 11% in the morning hours. Fortunes built over lifetimes were erased before lunch. And then, around noon, something unexpected happened. Word began to spread across the floor. The bankers were meeting, the big names. Got the men who controlled more wealth than most nations. At the offices of J.P. Morgan and Company, just steps from the exchange, the most powerful financiers in America had gathered in emergency session. Thomas Lamont of Morgan Bank, Albert Wiggin from Chase National, Charles Mitchell from National City Bank. Together, they controlled billions. And they had a plan. They would pool their resources somewhere between $20 and $30 million and step into the market as buyers, not to make money, to restore confidence. To show America that the smart money believed in the system, they chose their messenger carefully. Richard Whitney, vice president of the New York Stock Exchange, a man with a famous name, a commanding presence, and connections to the Morgan Empire. At precisely 1:30 p.m., Whitney walked onto the trading floor. Chaos parted around him. Traders stopped mid-shout to watch. Whitney strode with deliberate calm to post number 2, the trading station for United States Steel, the bluest of blue-chip stocks. In a voice loud enough to carry across the floor, he announced, "I bid $205 for 10,000 steel." The current market price was around $193. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Whitney was bidding $12 above market, offering to pay more than he had to, signaling that the smart money saw value where others saw panic. He didn't stop there. Whitney moved to the next post, and the next, placing massive bids on General Electric, AT&T, Anaconda Copper. Always above market price. Always with the same theatrical confidence. $20 million in buy orders placed in a matter of minutes, and it worked. The selling stopped. Prices stabilized, then incredibly they began to climb. By the closing bell, the Dow had recovered most of its losses. It ended down just 2%, a remarkable reversal from the morning's bloodbath. The ticker tape, still running for hours behind, finally fell silent after 7 p.m. Headlines the next morning were almost triumphant. Bankers halt stock panic. Organized support saves market. Worst is over, say financial leaders. Richard Whitney became an instant hero, the man who saved Wall Street. Photographers captured him smiling, confident, the very picture of American financial strength. Investors exhaled. The panic had been contained. The system worked. The bankers had proven that the market was too big, too important, too central to American life to ever truly fail. Over the weekend, a cautious optimism returned. Perhaps the whole thing had been a healthy correction, a shakeout of the weak hands. The nervous amateurs had been flushed out, and now the serious investors could resume the climb to prosperity. Such was the narrative they accepted, the belief they required to carry on. In reality, the bankers' assistance did not constitute a solution. It amounted only to a postponement, while the agent of their downfall quietly prepared. The weekend offered no peace. While headlines declared the crisis over, Western Union boys knocked on doors across America, delivering margin calls. Thousands of telegrams. Thousands of demands for cash that investors didn't have. Find the money by Monday morning, or watch your broker sell everything. When the opening bell rang on October 28th, the selling began immediately. No hesitation. No gradual slide. Stocks plunged as if pushed off a cliff. Traders kept glancing toward the Morgan offices, waiting for Richard Whitney to stride onto the floor with another rescue. He never came. Around midday, Charles Mitchell was spotted entering J.P. Morgan and Company. Hope flickered briefly. But Mitchell wasn't there to save the market. He was there to arrange a personal loan, to protect his own fortune from the disaster he could no longer prevent. The bankers had done the math. Thursday's intervention had been a bucket of water thrown at a forest fire. They'd fired their only bullet and the beast was still charging. By the closing bell, the Dow had lost 38.33 points, a drop of 12.82%, the worst single-day decline in history. That night, Wall Street didn't sleep. Brokerage offices blazed with light until dawn. The restaurants overflowed with shell-shocked traders drinking heavily, speaking quietly, staring into nothing. The death spiral had begun. Margin calls forcing sales, sales pushing prices lower. Lower prices triggering more margin calls. The system was eating itself alive. Children from nearby tenements played stickball in the empty streets, using crumpled ticker tape as baseballs. The adults knew what the children didn't. Tomorrow would be worse. Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Legend says nobody heard the opening bell. The roar of sell, sell, sell drowned out everything else. From the first second, the market disintegrated. 30 minutes, 3.5 million shares traded. $2 billion vanished. The day was just beginning. 16.4 million shares would change hands before it ended, 5 times a normal busy day. The system simply couldn't cope. The ticker tape fell 2.5 hours behind. Investors watched prices from mid-morning while the afternoon slaughter was already underway. Western Union hired taxicabs to shuttle messages because telegraph lines had collapsed. On the trading floor, men's stuffed trade slips into wastebaskets because there was nowhere else to put them. One trader fainted, was revived, and went straight back to work. Fistfights broke out. Grown men wept at their posts. Prices told a story of annihilation. General Electric fell from 396 to 210. AT&T dropped over 100 points. Radio Corporation of America, the decade's glamour stock, began a collapse from 505 to just 26. There were moments when stocks had no buyers at any price. The bid side simply vanished. John D. Rockefeller announced he was buying. The market didn't care. Nothing could stop it. By the closing bell, the Dow had lost another 11.73%. Combined with Monday, the market had dropped 23% in 2 days. $14 billion gone, while millions watched their dreams turn to ash. Jesse Livermore counted his winnings. $100 million in profits. Earned by betting against the dream when everyone else believed. The tide had finally come in, and the sandcastles were gone. Black Tuesday wasn't the bottom. It was only the beginning. The market continued falling for nearly 3 years. By July 1932, the Dow hit 41.22, an 89% collapse from its September 1929 peak. Stocks wouldn't return to pre-crash levels until November 1954. 25 years of waiting. The ripple effects destroyed everything they touched. Thousands of banks failed. 13 million jobs vanished. Unemployment hit 25%. Families who had felt wealthy in October were standing in breadlines by Christmas. The Great Depression had begun, and what became of the players in our story? Irving Fisher, the economist who proclaimed the permanently high plateau, lost everything. Remington Rand stock fell from $58 to $1. He died nearly bankrupt, his reputation shattered. Roger Babson, who warned of the crash, received no vindication. Wall Street blamed him for causing the panic with his pessimism. And Jesse Livermore, the man who made $100 million betting against America's dream, he lost it all within 5 years. Filed bankruptcy in 1934. In November 1940, he walked into a hotel cloakroom and shot himself. The money couldn't save any of them. The crash of 1929 wasn't a freak accident. It was the inevitable result of believing that this time was different, that old rules no longer applied, that prosperity built on leverage and faith could last forever. Those same delusions return in every bubble. The dot-com crash, the 2008 collapse. Different costumes, same lies. The families who went to bed wealthy and woke up ruined learned what every generation must learn again. Confidence without substance is not wealth. It's just confidence waiting to be shattered. History doesn't repeat. But ignore its warnings, and it will crush you all the same. That's the real story of 1929. If you learned something new today, subscribe and hit the bell. More coming soon.